All right, and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 252. Woof. 252 for the week of July 31st or heading into August. That means that we've got a lot more game releases coming up here in August as things start to ramp up for the fall or squeeze in before the end of summer. So we've got some new releases to talk about tonight. We've also got some news stories and a little bit of what else we've been playing here on Enough to Keep Going. Every week we're talking not only about what we've been playing, but also what's been going on in the news over the course of the week. And because we are gaming parents, we also make sure that we assign ourselves some homework once a month. It's the summertime, so we stretch it out and give ourselves time to take care of that. So last week we had our report out on our assignment. We've got another assignment for the next few weeks regarding remasters. And joining me tonight to talk about all that we've been up to over the past week is Game Logic. Game Logic, I know you're in the middle of stuff right now, but I'm glad you are here. We'll take the head nod as that works.
Yeah, so no, I'm glad to be here too. We're running a little late tonight due to my fault. I had upgraded a PC earlier, and then I had it's been a long day. So started off with a 3.5 mile run this morning, and then my wife got sick. So then it was kids' birthday parties and all sorts of other stuff that was just all me. And by the time I finished that PC upgrade, I was staring at my notation app for all the gear that I needed to break out to set up for the podcast. And the next thing I knew, I was staring at blackness. And then I woke up right at 8:30. So I hurriedly put everything together and jumped on. So my apologies for us running late tonight.
That's okay. That's a long stretch of a day. Anytime you have a kid's birthday party, it's an energy drain. So congrats on the 5K this morning. Nice job. Ran my 3.5 yesterday. So, all right. So that's now that we've got our exercise regiment in, and I'm going to start off first because I've got a new game and it gives you time to make sure everything else on the back end is going well. So I've been playing this week Multiversus. So this is the new platform fighter game that came out. It's an it's open beta at this point. Last week it was out in closed beta if you purchased one of the Founders Packs. This week it is out on all three platforms, PC, PlayStation, and Xbox for an open beta. And it is a whole lot of fun. I was very interested to see how they would monetize it. There are lots of skins. There are ring out effects, like as you knock an enemy out that you can have ring out effects. There's taunts. There's things like that. But in terms of characters, all the characters can be purchased not only with premium with real money, but also with in-game currency. So as you play, as you complete quests, as you earn achievements throughout the game, you'll get coins and you'll have the ability to unlock characters. Right now there are 17 characters, 16, and then LeBron James from Space Jam 2 was released this week with the open beta. The way it works is that there's 4 characters in a free rotation once a week. Last week during the closed beta, it was a different set of 4. This week it's another set. This is similar to a lot of mobile games that have free characters and that kind of rotate through. You can buy a Founders Packs, which are, you've got a $40 one, a $60, and a $100 one. The $40 one unlocks 15 characters, and the $60 one unlocks 20 characters, along with the first Battle Pass. Right now, the Battle Pass is the preseason Battle Pass, which is only $300, so it's like $3, 300 game currency, and that it's only about 20 levels or so. But it, as I've been playing, as my sons have been playing, they've already up to about level 14 in the Battle Pass over the course of the week, and they're really enjoying it. I am enjoying it, but my my level of understanding of a platform fighter is not nearly as extensive as my Super Smash Brothers loving sons. So they have a lot more nuance to it. They've been playing online, but one of the things this does, which I think is really a good value and also smart economics, is that if you're playing local, like couch co-op, all the characters and all the perks are unlocked. So it's a free game. All the characters are unlocked if you're going to sit down on a couch together. There's a few hoops because everybody at this point needs a Multiversus account. But once you create that, it's relatively easy to jump in and play couch co-op or couch multiplayer. And having all the characters unlocked really is nice from a free game perspective, but also kind of smart from an economics perspective. Like, it gives you a chance to play around with other characters, figure out different styles, what you like, who you like, and then as you're turned loose in the game to play online, that you may have to purchase those characters that you fell in love with or got good with playing locally in either the kind of training areas or also just in local multiplayer. The other benefit of having so one of the things this does is that you unlock perks as you go, and you can equip 3 different perks. And as those perks, do things like they can stack projectiles so that it can add a freeze to a character, or they can be buffs for your teammate. It's really focused on multiplayer. Online is focused on a 2v2 that you're playing on teams. And so being able to understand, play around with all the different perks. I've seen my son play online with a friend, and they'll complement each other's perks so that they're stacking, and that it ends up being a good, it works out nicely in terms of team complements. And so it adds some depth there, because of it isn't simply just a free-for-all, one 4-player, every person for themselves. And the team pieces, there's a number of moves in the characters that can provide buffs or assists, things like as you work through even just the training, that Wonder Woman and Rain Dog, which is an original character for this game, have, like, Wonder Woman's lasso of truth can grab a character and pull them back, or tether them as they jump off the stage. And so there's some nice kind of combos that you can make because of it. It's got a lot of depth. I think it plays really smoothly. The character variety is nice. From anybody from Hanna-Barbera to DC to Iron Giant and Game of Thrones. There's a lot of potential Cartoon Network characters. There's a whole lot that this game could continue to, and there's been some data mines of where there are potential characters coming. So this could have a real long tail to it in terms of support. So it'll be, as it comes out of early beta, they've already done some balancing. And Taz, who was incredibly strong last week, has been debuffed and kind of nerfed a little bit. So it's something where they definitely are staying active. They have already, over the course of the summer, provided some tournaments in the alphas and the betas. And so they're really looking at this in terms of a multiplayer online game. And while I was suspect and hesitant about how they would monetize it, the fact that these perks are tied to gameplay and unlocking as you progress a character, and not just something you can go in and pay to win type of thing. So that creates a sense of balance that definitely you can encounter, and I've seen it online where you can encounter players who are definitely higher levels than you and have a lot more perks, but at the same time, that can stack the deck against you a little bit or increase the challenge, but the fighting is tight enough that it still can be, I've seen lower level characters take out higher level characters just on skill as well. So it's if a platform fighter and a non-Smash Brothers platform fighter is something that you're interested in trying, the barrier to entry is pretty low. If you've never been a platform fighter fan, I don't know that this does anything new for you, right? I think that it does. If you've got friends to play with, there's some nice kind of co-op pieces because of the team element, but it's still at its core is that type of fighting game. So you know what you're getting into. Speaking of, you have questions, or I was gonna.
Many.
Okay.
So, so help me out, and I may have missed it. I'm sure I did while I was setting stuff up and getting the social media out. So, can you just buy characters? I mean, can you buy Batman and like other? I assume other DC Universe characters will come along and you can just buy them,
Yes.
or okay.
Yeah, so you right now there's, in terms of DC characters, there's Batman, Superman, Harley Quinn, Wonder Woman. There's been others that are already kind of data mined. Yes, you can buy them either with premium currency, or you can buy them with in-game currency. And so, my son had enough coins within the first few days of playing that he unlocked and purchased Harley Quinn. So, definitely is something where, if you're playing on a regular basis and doing, as if you're doing your daily quests in terms of battle pass rank ups and things like that, you will continue to earn coins, and that gives you the opportunity to unlock more characters. So nobody is locked behind a freemium kind of wall at this point.
And those characters that you unlock, like particularly obviously ones that you think would be popular, are those behind the battle pass, or are they on the free battle pass tier, or is there just one tier?
So this is again another thing that I think they do well. The battle pass has skins, emotes, kind of taunts, and ring out effects, like like your victory pose type of thing. The battle pass has no characters tied to it. That was one of the things I was very interested last week when the early beta, the closed beta came out, is what that battle pass is going to have. And at this point, there are no characters that are locked behind a battle pass. So if you want a certain skin to a character, yeah, it's locked behind a battle pass. It may come back to the store at some point in time, or it may have the FOMO aspect like Fortnite does, like it's only in the battle pass. But no characters at this point are gated behind a battle pass.
So that is the only way to earn them, is to just buy them outright?
Buy them outright, or to earn in-game currency to be able to purchase them.
Okay, all right. So
okay. You could really be a no real money character in this, player in this, and continue to play enough and slowly unlock your different characters. Or, at $60, the price of a regular game, you could buy it. You could do a founders pack that would unlock all the characters and the next 3 characters that are coming. Like Rick and Morty are both scheduled to be coming in the opening weeks of when it launches next week.
Right. But either way, there's one avenue of access to the characters. It's just there's multiple ways of access to the currency to procure the characters, either straight out of your pocket or from earning in-game currency. Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
So, talk to me about performance and latency, right? Because the reason I don't play online like fighting games is because I always feel like the least hiccup in in latency, right, would cause a problem, right? And I don't feel like fighting games arbitrate that as well as like first-person shooters do. Now, on top of people just like ringing up like all of the cheesy kind of money plays. So how does performance work, right? And have you had an opportunity to kind of see, are there instances where somebody just has like a significantly better connection, or things like I remember on Xbox, like people used to like pull their Ethernet cable right when they were losing, right? Things like that.
Right. So in the fighting game scene, there is, netcode is really important. Oftentimes rollback is also present especially in platform fighters. One of the places where Smash has kind of fallen behind some of the others, even like Nickelodeon's All-Star Brawl last year, uh, is because of things like rollback code, things like that. So playing on PlayStation 5 on a Wi-Fi connection, you know, my sons and I have been playing in the evenings in heavy traffic, and it doesn't really seem, once the game's loaded, it doesn't seem like there's been any kind of either cheap hits or mistimed things based on net code. So it does seem pretty solid. I think I think it's certainly one of the things that they are pushing for, because they're trying to make this a competitive scene. And I'll give credit to my older son, who's a big platform fighter fan, has played things like Brawlout and Rivals of Aether and a number of other kind of smaller indie ones, and is very much aware of kind of the, not quite to the frame counting in terms of things, but definitely is aware of the potential for that and has not complained about it at all. And so I think that speaks well to the stability of the beta and the netcode that's present here.
And so far, it's only DC characters that are in, right? No Marvel characters.
No, because it's a WB property.
Okay.
This is it is. It's the WB multiverse. Really is the right. Like it will end up with anybody within the Cartoon Network, Hanna-Barbera, all DC. It has yes, you're not going to get a DC versus Marvel aspect of this just by the nature of the license holder.
No, that's good. I mean, I haven't tracked this at the very detailed level, but I definitely got like Laugh Olympics vibes from some of the characters that they'd included in it. So it's nice to hear from a thematic standpoint that it'll kind of stay central to those core characters. So no, that's pretty good. Do you know what studio is doing this? I mean, is this a Warner Brothers in-house studio?
Let me look it up right quick, because it's their. I'm trying to remember, because it was a new Player First Games. So yeah, it's an in-house. It's a newer dev. I haven't looked at all their pedigree in terms of where they're coming from, things like that. But this is, as a studio, it's their first kind of go round at a platform fighter.
Okay, that's cool. It's as we were talking about Skull and Bones, I think a week ago. It's interesting to that you guys have elected to get in there on the ground floor and kind of have the maximum opportunity to kind of see how the game evolves, but also right to kind of advantage yourself competitively speaking from giving yourself the longest learning curve possible.
Yeah, no, it's been kind of fun to jump in the early pieces here and get a sense for it and play around. So, it is, there's not a whole lot of single player content. If people who played Smash mainly played things like the whatever the Kirby story mode aspect of that with the spirits, if that was your avenue, there's not much here. If you're not looking to play online against other people, that is definitely the central focus of this. I think the one kind of negative thing I'll say is that compared to things like Smash or Nickelodeon's All-Star Brawl, getting into a local multiplayer takes a few more hoops, because it's not like one of the main options on the home screen. You've kind of got to look through a menu or two to get to there. But it's certainly possible.
Very cool. And it's on all platforms at this point?
Everything but Switch. So PlayStation, Xbox, PC. Yep. But you've been playing a Switch game, actually one that I played the demo for a couple weeks ago. And did you play the demo, or did you pick up the whole game itself?
I did not play the demo. I just picked up the game out of the gate.
So what motivated you to pick up Klonoa?
I think we talked a little bit last week, just as I've kind of swum through the whole thing with social media and just kind of how I've been like repositioning myself in various gaming conversations online. That caused me to want to pull back a little bit from a lot of the PvP things that I've been playing, and I also really got the firm buzz this week that I will eventually be getting back on the console train, and so So I picked up the Switch OLED a few weeks ago, and it's really a great mixture now with high end, high fidelity PC gaming, and then switching over to play on the Switch because there's a big um, I don't want to say gap, but there's a big difference, right, in the
Certainly,
approach to
yeah.
gaming on those two types of platforms. So, I like I said, I kind of came through the week making the decision that I was going to kind of go in this direction. I think I mentioned last week that I was also becoming more and more interested in getting back to kind of the single player story driven stuff. And so, Switch just happened to be the first platform that I kind of went down that path with. And I wanted, I was looking for something kind of new-ish to play. I wasn't necessarily ready to jump into Xenoblade or some of the other things that had come out recently. So I decided to give this a whirl. Definitely a title that's not in my wheelhouse. I'm not a big platform gamer. And I'm also just not a big this kind of setting and this kind of world, kind of the cartoony aspect of kind of mascot-oriented characters is just not a place where I live. I tend to, drive much more so towards kind of realistic, real-world settings and graphics and things like that. But I decided to kind of, as our friend and co-host Swiss would say, kind of take this week to embrace the whimsy and kind of approach the game a little differently. I think one of the things I wrote about this week was how whenever I go into a game, there's kind of a thing that I'm looking to get out of it, and there's kind of a prepackaged deal, an arrangement of things that I want. And so, much like kind of when I kind of try to put together my whole shtick about how I was going to review comic books, and also kind of eventually kind of did things about games, and coming from writing movie reviews and everything like that. There was such an obsession maybe about establishing a rubric and a framework, right? That where within which you can establish scores, right, and review scores for games and things, and have a hope of maintaining some level of consistency, right? And that type of thinking and that type of perspective definitely causes me to approach games a certain way. And I started kind of recognizing that and pulling back a little bit away from it this week. So, so Klonoa is a game that is probably closest to maybe a Crash Bandicoot, maybe kind of in my mind.
Which makes sense. It was a PlayStation 1 platformer, kind of a locked perspective.
Yep. Yeah, and you could definitely tell kind of the difference in age, right, in terms of how platforming game design has progressed in the years. I don't think it's that. A lot of the times we talk about games like that, and we make the statement that I just made, and it's a reference to kind of how the gameplay feels kind of antiquated and a little trapped. The only area in which I really felt that was in there's no camera control. So that felt particularly hampering as I went around a lot of the levels. But I really love the art design. The color palette was really great. It's very appealing. Klonoa, the character itself, again, normally there's nothing for me to grip onto, right? I don't know what this world is. I don't know what species these are. Things like that I normally get wrapped around the axle about.
I don't know that Klonoa knows what species it is either.
Right. And it's kind of a very weird setup, too, just even in the fiction of the world, right? Because as far as you can tell, Klonoa just kind of lives off by himself. There's not like a village, right? It's just a lot of these characters are kind of scattered around the world, and they know of each other, but you don't necessarily feel like they live like in close proximity to each other. Like you can't look out your window and see like grandpa or or grandma or some of these other characters and stuff. It seems like you have to go like over the horizon or whatever to go meet them. So it's kind of an interesting world. I've hit a few of the boss battles, and so far, and so Klonoa consists of two games. It consists of I think Phantasy is the first one, and I can't even remember what the second one is called because I haven't gotten around to playing it yet. But it's two games in the series that are packaged together. I think total gameplay time I've seen anywhere from 11 and a half hours to as high as 15 hours. I think for people who like really try and go through and unlock everything. it's got a decent amount of challenge without being an overwhelming amount of challenge. It is not particularly punishing from a precision platforming perspective. I'm probably in probably the 3/4 point of the first game, and I'm just now hitting some points where there are some point precision jumps, like kind of onto protruding logs that are sticking out from the landscape, where um, if you can miss those. But Klonoa does this little thing where, like, when he's on the edge of a platform, he's like on his tiptoes, and he's kind of like leaning forward, acting like he's
Does the Sonic kind of
yeah.
teetering on the edge? Yep.
Exactly. So it's got a little bit of range there. It's a little less forgiving in the jump off point, and so kind of as you're approaching those edges of those platforms, you can't jump from there, right? Your jump will wind up being late. You really need to kind of squarely hit your jump kind of in the middle of even those really skinny points. But enemies aren't too punishing, and so if you haven't played Klonoa, it has this mechanic where I want to say maybe it's a little Kirby-esque kind of in this way. You have it's basically a water gun. I think it's called something else, but basically it fires a short-range projectile, and when you hit, and maybe it's a little bit like the cap too in Super Mario Odyssey as well. And so when you hit an enemy, you kind of grapple them and pull them to you, and then you hold them above your head. And at that point, you can either fire them in a direction, and sometimes that can be done to trip like certain surfaces and features on the screen, or they can be used to destroy another enemy. You can hold them over your head and double jump off of them, and maybe a few other things. So,
And that was really one of the unique mechanics in it,
Yeah.
is that kind of launching yourself off an enemy to get different places that you couldn't before.
right. So this is a Bandai Namco game, I should mention. So if you kind of think about animation that's kind of along the lines of a Banjo-Kazooie or other games like that, that should resonate. The platforming has not, like I said, I'm about 3/4 through the game through. The platforming has been pretty straightforward. I've just hit a point where you had to do some really goofy, like, gymnastics parkour, where you had to, I think I had two enemies that came out that were like kind of one above the other, and I had to jump up, grab one, hold it above my head, and then after I'd landed again, I had to jump up, platform off of it, fire and grapple the other one. Once I'd caught him and I had him above my head, as I was in midair, I had to double jump off of him, turn around, fire at like a secret tchotchke thing or whatever, and grab that. And as you go, so part of the fiction is as you go through the game, there are citizens of this world that have been captured and ensnared in like different nightmares. And so as you go around each level, there are like 6 of them that you're supposed to find. It doesn't require you to necessarily find all 6. That doesn't prevent you from completing a level. As far as I can tell, you just have to transit the level. On every level, I've freed some number of those citizens, but it hasn't necessarily been, to 100%. That hasn't prevented me from moving on. So it seems like there's, different things to achieve to go through that allow you to continue to progress the game. Boss battles have not been too bad. I mean, it's definitely pointed at kind of a thing for that adults will find mildly challenging, but is something also achievable like by kids. And so there have been a couple boss battles where again you have to kind of concurrently pull off like 2 or 3 kind of different motions like at once, right, in order to counter the boss. So I've had a thing where I've had to like jump over spiked people, capture one particular character on the screen, throw them at a serpent right as the serpent's coming at you and diving across the screen. So you have to both dodge the serpent but then also throw a thing at him at his side, right? And so I think there are things that maybe from an adult perspective don't feel that complex, but for a kid probably will. But overall, I've had a pretty decent time. Performance has been fine on the Nintendo Switch. I've played both undocked and docked. I've played, I haven't used the Pro controller yet. I've used my third-party Pro controller, and played both in handheld and then with the Joy-Con and Joy-Con grip. So it's been pretty pleasant. And I've played both, with the D-pad, as well as then switching off to use the analog. The analog sticks feel better. They didn't necessarily feel intuitive right off the bat. It was easier for me to kind of get into it using the D-pad for directionality, but we're getting there. The most probably significant thing that I've come through in this experience was so I had a swim meet this weekend for the kids. The youngest one wound up having a cold on Friday. That's when she was supposed to swim. It was an out-of-town swim meet. She was supposed to swim on Friday. We were supposed to stay overnight. Then the oldest kid was supposed to swim on Saturday. So Friday, I stayed home with the sick kid. My wife took the oldest kid and went on to the hotel room to stay overnight, so that they would already be down there for her swim the next day. And so this was the first time that a kid had shown enough interest in the Nintendo Switch. Now that I have the OLED downstairs with me, and I have the OG Switch upstairs, where she wanted to play a game, and she wanted like her and she wanted to play a game. I wanted her to play Klonoa, but of course, the way the Nintendo Switch works, I didn't want her monkeying with my save files, right? So I had to set up an account. We have gone through this, I think, several times before with each cast member, as each cast member has gone through this experience, the whole difference between the way Nintendo treats an account and a profile, which there really isn't any such thing really truly as a profile. A profile is like an abstraction that you kind of make up. Nintendo refers to them all entirely as accounts. So, and then, I had to do the whole herky-jerky with, like, I set up her account, but the upstairs Switch was not my primary Switch. My Switch was the primary, but in order to let them play the games that I had purchased, I had to switch the upstairs one right to the primary, which is totally non-intuitive. And then you got to worry about parental controls, and then you got to pull down the app, and yada yada yada. And then what really made me cranky about the whole thing was when I set her account up, and despite the fact that I have PayPal linked to my Nintendo Switch account, so that's how I buy games, I still had to enter a credit card, right, to allow them to do a 50-cent purchase against my credit card as basically verification.
To verify.
Yeah, as a person who works in identity management, that I was ready to throw a Nintendo Switch out the window at that point.
It's been that way. I think the Wii U did that. I'm pretty sure the 3DS did that. I mean, it's not a intuitive or user-friendly type of process.
Right. So I got through that. So her account is set up. I'm sure. Fortunately, the older kid yet has not realized that the younger kid has her own account on that upstairs Switch now. I'm sure that will come up, and I will have to do the same thing. But yeah, it is a Byzantine, like, just combative, contestuous process that like only by virtue of Nintendo and the type of family-oriented content that they provide, right, would any parent like be interested in going through that. So
yes, you'll have to do this again with your other child, and you've done the thing that we've done here is setting up the kind of family one as the primary one, and everything else needs an online connection. We have run into just this summer with 3 Switches now that it even becomes more problematic in terms of, we got to the point where for some of the games, like, we just need to buy an additional copy in order to have enough people to, there was a whole week of my sons and I trying to figure out how we can manage 3 Switches and have everybody play everything without having to rebuy multiple different copies of things.
Right. Well, that was my feeling as I came away this weekend. I was like, because I'm giving strong consideration to getting them their own Nintendo Switch Lites right later on this year, like for Christmas or something, and I'm like, and as I went through it, I was like, I should have just bought them their own. Right. It would have been less of a hassle for me to buy them their own and have them have their own accounts, right, and have them buy their own stuff. And it's only because I have such a significant amount of stuff that it's worthwhile for me to share. And of course, as I say all that, of course, what I did was I signed up for the family plan and the expansion pass and downloaded all that stuff, right? Because I just wanted to put like as much content as I could on that upstairs Switch, so I wouldn't have to worry about getting them single titles. And so she played one of the Kirby titles afterwards. Interesting experience in the legacy of Nintendo. in and of itself. As you know, she was like, and she's played one version of Kirby, I think, on the 3DS before, and she was like, I want to play Kirby. So of course, there's like 9 different versions of Kirby. Some of those have 8 different versions of Kirby in the games themselves, and of course, none of them are the same. And so we went around like 3 or 4 different versions. She's like, that's not Kirby, that's not Kirby, that's not Kirby, right? Until we finally found a thing that kind of in her mind kind of synced. In my mind as well, right? I was looking for like, okay, I'm looking for a thing that kind of is my perception of like the baseline version of Kirby, and there's so many things that are not that.
Yeah, you don't want Kirby Puzzle or Kirby Golf. You
Right.
want Superstar Ultra with side-scrolling Kirby.
Right, right. So interesting experience. Klonoa is great, great art, great color palette, good platforming. Not, of course, what makes me cranky about platforming is like the expectation of super precision, and it doesn't really go to that extent. So I'm having a good time, and it's a good approach path back to getting to first player kind of story driven, narrative driven content on the Nintendo Switch.
Nice. Well, and it also works out as your gaming assignment for August, which is remasters. So I'll be curious if you finish the game, because I'll be interested in your perception of the ending, and also if you dabble with Klonoa 2, which was a PlayStation 2 game, in terms of the kind of just development and progression of the game over those 2 generations. So we got a few news stories before we head into the rest of our games that we've been playing. Game Logic, do you want to hit the first one here? I know that I turned down my Steam Deck reservation, but this story makes me feel like I could put in another reservation later this year when I have some more funding and potentially not wait a year for it.
Yeah, so I should be able to go through this one pretty quick. I think this is what has pretty much made the rounds, but basically Valve reported earlier this week that they had surmounted all of their kind of supply chain issues, and so they had been able to accelerate delivery of all Q3 Steam Decks, and reported that all basically they took everyone who was not in Q3 and just threw them into a bucket called Other, and indicated that all those people, which includes me, would be capable of buying a Steam Deck by the end of this calendar year. So that presents an interesting conundrum. I'm in line right now to buy the high-end version, which I think is the 512 gig version. There have been one of the social media exchanges that I was involved in recently was there was a PC gamer story that talked about you using NVMe drives that were of a slightly different form factor, because they are available at higher capacities for less money, and it talks about how like they don't perfectly fit into the slot, and so they cause some bending of the heat spreader, and this is having been a reader of PC Gamer in the early 2000s, at the turn of the century, right, in 1999 and 2000, when like Gary Whitta was the editor-in-chief, and after that Greg Viderman, and where like Norman Chan, who had been over at Maximum PC, right, came over and became the hardware, like a fairly illustrious like rogues gallery of journalists who have served at PC Gamer. From that time till now, where now I think Evan Lottie is the editor-in-chief, and I continued to read PC Gamer while kind of that old guard was on their way out, and Evan came through as an intern, and it is just like the National Enquirer now. It's a tabloid, and I'm like, for them to run a story that irresponsible, I think in the Witta and Viderman days, I can't imagine that any story like that would have been, and like the headline on it basically encouraged people to do this, and you didn't really get to all the warnings and whatnot about it until you got really deep, far down into the article. It's such to the point, the extent that the lead hardware engineer at Valve tweeted out that basically, tweeted that article out and basically said, "Don't do this." Right? The sizing of the NVMe form factor for the Steam Deck is specifically selected, and the maintainability envelope around the Steam Deck is specifically designed to house this form factor, right? Don't do this. You're gonna potentially damage your Steam Deck. You're gonna void your warranty. So at any rate, I had kind of gone down the path that I'd seen that you and I talked about, you canceling yours. I had said that I was like done and backing out and like was just gonna be fine with PC now, but when I climbed back on the OLED wagon and I said, I want something because now, Stadia is no longer really my solution for on travel. Um, I've got the Steam Deck, but I'm definitely kind of interested. I mean, sorry, I've got the Nintendo Switch OLED, but I'm definitely kind of interested in being able to continue PC gaming on the go. And when we get into the holidays, there'll be trips and things that I have to take. So, and now that I'm playing the Switch OLED more handheld, and that's becoming kind of an interesting kind of experience. Even though I said, I would any device like this I would always use docked when I'm at home. It's
Not with that screen though. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how it plays out. See when exactly I come up in the queue, if it'll come up at an opportune time, or if it's just gonna come up at a time where I'm like, nah, I don't feel like spending that money right now.
Yeah, that was definitely part of my challenge of just kind of budgeting that out. So, speaking of money, in true enough to keep going fashion, we've got two other news stories here, Sony and Microsoft, as related to sales and quarterly earnings. Game Logic, do you want to take Sony and I'll grab Microsoft?
Yeah, sure. So I think overall, right before maybe we will get into the nitty gritty specifics of these numbers. I think overall the real tale of the tape here is that we had a pandemic and the metrics and right and the KPIs, OKRs, right, all of the sales indicators and stuff around the gaming industry have been literally through the roof, right, for the last 2 years. And I think earlier this year we were still kind of riding that bow wave, right? Particularly as you turn right the knock on of the supply impingement means that there was a bow wave of demand, right, to obtain consoles and games that ran on those consoles, kind of trapped within that pandemic sleeve, right? And so even though we were kind of coming out of the pandemic and lifestyles, at least for Americans and people in the Western world, were starting to kind of turn back to the norm, I think that there was still some pent-up demand that hadn't been satisfied, right? Because supply hadn't been able to keep up with that. Well, now we're cresting past that, and now what we're starting to see is a really steep, in some cases, fall off of that demand, right? You have the people who were the early adopters who went out and got these things, right, and who were able to get them because they were sitting at home, right? So when I got my consoles the first time around, I got them because I was able to be in a meeting, but also be on my app, right, trying to obtain a next generation console, which is not a scenario that I would have normally been able to, right, to pull off had it kind of been the norm of me being at work. And so we're now starting to see where some of these numbers are sliding down. I think what we need to keep in mind is these numbers are sliding down in comparison to an all-time historical high. I think people are seeing these numbers sliding down and they're like, oh my God, like things are going bad. I'm like, no, things are returning to the norm, right?
Right. I think that is absolutely the truth. Like it was, there was a bubble and we're coming out of that. I think even the fact that the revenues are down on the Microsoft end, but it's within their expectations, which means like companies were also planning for this reality as well. They knew exactly what you were talking about in terms of the pent-up demand, also the supply chain pieces, that some of that's going to start to level out. And you do like so many other industries, you can't compare numbers over the last 2 years. You almost have to go back pre-COVID to make a realistic comparison sometimes.
Right, and I mean, I wonder if kind of historically that's the right. Those are the types of analyses that will be done, right? Where you will kind of pluck out 2 years of kind of abnormal trends, right, and really run those comparisons, of post pandemic versus pre pandemic. So the PlayStation numbers for what they're worth, year over year increase in total. PlayStation 5 sales down on software unit sales. As far as digital sales go, a slight uptick, I think, which is more significant on the PlayStation side because that is a customer base that kind of bucks the trend and shows a much higher tendency of buying physical than the other two consoles do, and especially than obviously PC. So it was interesting to kind of see a very minuscule kind of reversal in the other direction. 4% year-on-year increase for the PlayStation 5, which makes sense, right, as we're seeing more supply kind of become available. Shipped 2.4 million units, up from 2.3 million versus the same quarter last year. Total PlayStation 5s that have shipped is 21.7 million units worldwide, which I don't know. I mean, we would have to run the historicals, but we're 2 years into the life cycle now, heading into the third holiday season. And we have sold, about a sixth of what the PlayStation 4 sold over its entire life cycle as the premier console. So those sales numbers, I think, over its kind of 7 year,
7 years.
Run were like 115, 120 million. So he seemed to be relatively on track despite the reduction in supply chain. Of course, there may also become another bump because we may see a PlayStation 5 Pro over time. Game sales down 26%, which was kind of interesting because we've seen. I feel we've seen good solid titles come along, right? But that was for the quarter, I guess. So
there hasn't really been a whole lot this quarter, right? You had Horizon earlier in the spring. Yeah.
So I think the tail of the tape continues on from their last quarter, right? Which is that there's kind of an expectation of seeing a challenge, right, in game sales that will include impacting third party. They completed their acquisition of Bungie this quarter, and so they talked about as we entered this fiscal year, they talked about that there will be increased spending for game development, right? In conjunction with all the studios that they've acquired, and that there would be increased expenses that would be held for the acquisition of Bungie. So that is a trend that I would expect to right here kind of every quarter as we go along. Nothing that I saw, typically during these earnings calls, we get, little nuggets dropped that kind of give us indications of what's coming down the pike from production pipeline. I didn't see anything of that nature here. No indications of any kind of changes in services outlook or game titles or anything that we don't already know about. So pretty mundane earnings report, I think, this quarter. How do things look for Xbox?
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar story in terms of the analysis of the bubble and coming down from it a little bit. That quarterly revenues fell by $259 million. Still, their revenue was up over the year. Even though they're down 7% this quarter, it's still generated $3 billion in sales and revenue in the 3 months in this quarter. One of the things, again, like I said earlier, that this was within their expectations, within their projections. They did see a dip in content and services. Similar to PlayStation in terms of game sales, but what they did see an increase in over the quarter is Game Pass subscriptions. And so from a Microsoft perspective, like, they still have not necessarily hit that peak of Game Pass subscribers either, as things are slowing down on a hardware end or on a services end, that their Game Pass subscriptions continue to grow. One of the other pieces that they brought up, which is more so, it's a nice little bullet point for your company than it is necessarily a bellwether for the market, that they've sold more Series X and S units at this point in this generation than any other of their previous generations, and that they've been the market leader in North America. They've led PlayStation 5 in North America for the last 3 quarters, which is nice when you're in an investor's call, but it doesn't necessarily take into account the supply chain constraints of PlayStation 5. And I think back to the Sony slide deck from their end of their fiscal year, where they really were projecting that PlayStation 4 sales were going to be higher than PlayStation 5 this year, simply by supply chain aspects. They didn't see PlayStation 5, they're not projecting it to take over PlayStation 4 sales until 23, based on just the availability of consoles. So again, nothing too shocking, and still in line with Sony and Microsoft.
So I see your sentiment and agree with it partially, but I feel like what's still valid, though, right, is when we think back to the Nintendo Switch, right, in the 2 years kind of after its launch, right, it was very much a tale of they could have sold more of that thing, we think, had they been able to put enough of those things on the shelves. But they were fighting with Apple and fighting with, Qualcomm, and fighting with other smartphone manufacturers for very similar parts, fighting with tablet manufacturers, right, because Android tablets were still being made. And so, right, I agree with you in that it's not necessarily indicative of demand, right? Where if there were more PlayStation 5 consoles on the shelves, right, that we think that there are more people who would want them than the Xbox consoles. But it still presents the challenge to Sony that if they are not able to get those things on the shelves, it's going to be it's going to create a race, right? In a market.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah. In a market where arguably maybe there wouldn't even be a race, right? Where Xbox maybe wouldn't even really be able to, really wouldn't have a voice in the mind share, right, so to speak, other than for, there are some good value propositions for Xbox, obviously, right? An Xbox Series S plus Game Pass, I think, is an amazing value proposition. Getting an Xbox, as I have been saying since the beginning of the generation, right? Getting an Xbox Series S now, which, is arguably definitely one of the lowest two entry points, right, for next generation gaming. If you don't consider the Nintendo Switch next gen, right, since it's kind of a half gen step up from last generation, you could say the Xbox Series S is the only way into, right, this generation of gaming, and in comparison to the Switch OLED, right, would make it the lowest entry point, right? So there are some great value proposition and some market positioning going on, from the Xbox camp. But it would be tough to argue that if there weren't, twice as many PlayStation 5s, right, on the shelves, that they wouldn't kind of be burying Xbox from a sales perspective. But the challenge remains, right? It's totally on Sony, right, to get those PlayStations on the shelf, and that's going to be a challenge, as we're now running up to the point in the life cycle where you would expect, right, there to be kind of a like I said, a PlayStation 5 Pro, and if Xbox is is able to go to the Xbox Series Y, right, and have them in the supply numbers that they've had, now you're going to be looking at, what is the 3-card Monte between potentially buying an even more powerful Xbox, right, versus, right, waiting around for a PlayStation 5 or a PlayStation 5 Pro that you can't really get your hands on, particularly when their games are at parity.
Yeah, I think that will be an interesting piece to this generation cycle, where last generation cycle, a few years in, we were looking for that kind of half step, and even it seemed to create an expectation of it. This generation, that half step may come a whole lot later, just by the nature of we have not even satisfied demand on the initial product, and why push that when there's still demand out there for the baseline, which in theory should only get cheaper to produce as time goes on.
Well, right. The interesting bit is PlayStation would have a reason to push it, right? PSVR 2, right? I mean, definitely a reason to throw a hardware-hungry, spec-hungry peripheral, right, more and more resources, right, as you go into the back half of, middle third, back half of this generation, right? theoretically the PlayStation 5 would be enough, right? But again, who is the battle really for enough, or is the battle really for superiority? And that creates an argument for PlayStation to definitely roll out that half step on schedule, so to speak, right, in parity with the last generation.
I always appreciate the industry market analysis that we can get into here, so that's great. Thank you. So we are coming close to our time here, but let's hit a few other games that we've been playing over the course of this week. Game Logic, at the end of last show, you mentioned that you were going to dive back into No Man's Sky. Give me a quick kind of update on that.
Yeah, I know I've been slow to go at this game, it now being kind of 6 years into its life cycle, but like, man, I'm so happy, right, that I bought this game, particularly on PC. It is just an amazing experience, right, when you start stringing together all of kind of the grand strategy motives of like, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, the fact that you're just not hardwired into the notion of the campaign, right, that you can just go do space exploration. And here on the precipice of Starfield, and as I've gotten into things like EVE Online and Star Citizen, right? To me, it really satisfies that need on a landscape of space exploration. I wrote a lot on Twitter and on my blog about kind of, on this show I've talked a lot about Sid Meier's Pirates, and just kind of how I had a great time kind of sailing the Caribbean and like finding new colonies, and that there was an ongoing kind of narrative in my head. That narrative is still there, right? And it's a very kind of Star Trek-like narrative as I go to these other planets and I discover things and I, make these decisions, and I look out on the horizon with my scanner and I'm like, can I make it? It's very, what is the guy's name? Now I'm forgetting, as I always do during the show. For some reason, when I come on the show is when I forget actors' names, whereas I seem to be able to rattle them off with nary skipping a beat outside of the show. But Matt Damon, The Martian, right? It's very much kind of feels like that, right? It's, I'm at base camp, I'm scanning the horizon, I see things, I'm like, can I make that, that copper, right, deposit, like, 600 distance units away, or is my suit's thermal protection, right, going to break down before I get there? Do I need to jump in my ship and take off and fly over there closer? If I do that, right, is that going to reduce the amount of star fuel that I have? Am I going to be able to make another jump, or am I going to have to collect fuel again?
Yep,
right.
That is that push-pull. Yeah, no, I completely know that sense of like, can I get there? Can I get back?
Yeah, so I love the game. And the only reason I'm not playing more of it is because I just, as all things, I'm wary of going down any one path that kind of totally sucks me in and causes me to ignore everything else. But it's an incredible time, and I'm playing it on a PC. I think I played it on my PC with a 37 Ti this week. So 1440p, all the details and everything turned on. Getting 144 frames per second. So it's just with HDR. This is a game where
sounds really nice. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
This is a game where HDR on versus HDR off actually makes a significant difference, right? Particularly when you talk about visibility out on the horizon. Kind of did my first kind of low altitude flyover. I was on a planet with these Titan worms on it, so it was kind of my first time really taking the ship up and kind of doing some low-level like worm hunting, killing some worm burrows, and taking out some of the Titan worms that pop up after that. So it was a great experience. I had a good time. However, as much as I enjoyed that experience, I am really excited to hear about your experience in Xenoblade Chronicles. It's unfortunate that Tao couldn't be on, because I was very curious to hear his too, but.
So we'll probably have to come back to this because I am only an hour in. So I mean, I think that this is a big, expansive game with a whole lot of systems, and I am just starting to peel back some layers of it. So at an hour in, I've got out into the open world. I've got through the first 20 minutes of cutscenes. The combat is somewhat similar at this point. I haven't got into all the kind of pairing up and combining that can happen that they've shown in the trailers. So really what I've just started to get a sense of who these characters are. If the piece I can say is that earlier this month, I picked back up Xenoblade Chronicles 2 just to play a little bit to have some comparison. This is running it seems much more optimized. It's running smoother. The frame rate, reports online say that it still drops at places. I've played it handheld and it looks really nice on an OLED. I've played it on a 1080p docked as well. It's, playing on 1080p, you could see that it feels a little jaggy. The getting out into the open world feels a little barren compared to what would be, this is no Horizon's Forbidden West type of open world beauty, but it is very functional, and it seems to run it's running better than a Xenoblade has at this point, right? Like it is. That's not to say that it's running perfectly, but it's running better than previous games. So I've also found it pretty easy to get back into. It's doing a good job kind of tutorializing without necessarily overwhelming you, which also means that it's kind of doling out its systems piece by piece to give you the option. And there are some quality of life things here that were not present in Chronicles 2, which I'm able to kind of notice because I've played them back to back relatively recently. So, but I have not played a whole lot. I just picked it up on Friday, got through, played a little bit, because I've been sinking more time into a mobile game, the Octopath Traveler game that came out on mobile this week. Octopath Traveler, Swiss played it on Switch back when it came out in 2018. It is a turn-based JRPG in true JRPG form. It has a little bit of gacha in it in terms of doing random pulls for characters, but there's not it's refreshing that there are not 6 currencies to manage and 8 different login rewards to get every single day. It feels like, and it says right on the title page, this is a single player RPG. We'll add some content as we go on, so enjoy it at your own pace. Like, it is not designed, this is not the Diablo Immortal aspect of throwing $400 values at you every time you level up. And so I've been able to kind of just play it as I'm waiting for things, run through, do some quests. There's 3 different mainline quests, but every character, there's one story I read said there's 64 characters, another said there's 80, but each of the characters have little 3-chapter side stories, which kind of tell some backstory of them and give a little bit of characterization. And those have been more enjoyable to some degree than the main plot. That it's just kind of fun to, it works very nicely as a mobile game and a turn-based game, and the rock paper scissors aspect of being weak against some combat and some spells works nicely in the way that you can have 8 characters up on the screen and 2 different kind of strategy, a backline and a front line that you can switch between. So there's a lot more taking on some higher level enemies. There's a lot more strategy than simply just kind of button mashing and grinding your way through. So I've been playing 2 different RPGs, but I will, by the time we get back, and I'll be out next week, but the time I'm back, I'll have more to say about Xenoblade Chronicles as well. So
you went straight from Xenoblade to Octopath. One question I wanted to ask about Xenoblade: is Xenoblade turn-based combat?
No, it is the way the Xenoblade games have all been kind of similar to MMO, that you have an auto attack, and then you have 3 or 4 different kind of cooldown attacks that you can do. So it is not turn-based in that way, that everybody is taking turns, but it's kind of on a timer, and it plays out kind of real time. So it's not simply you're queuing up skills.
So it's almost a little more like kind of those Final Fantasy kind of faux real time combat systems.
Yeah, it's similar to that kind of Final Fantasy 12 kind of gambit based, where you're setting up things, and it feels in that very similar to that. All right, well, that catches us through. We'll we have always plenty to talk about here on Enough to Keep Going. Next week, we'll be back. Game Logic, you are hosting next week. Tal will be back as well. As I said, I'll be out. I've got a little bit of a vacation to take. So I will not be here next week, but I'll be back the week after. And I'll be curious to listen to you gentlemen to see what you've been up to over the course of the week. And as always, to get some nice discussion about the industry as we had tonight. So thank you for that discussion, Game Logic. Any other final closing thoughts? Any housekeeping before we head out for the night?
No, just one question. So it sounded like you're taking the Switch OLED with you. Is that the plan?
That is the plan. We'll see what happens. Yes.
Right.
Yep. But I did buy Xenoblade physical, and so have the ability to swap that between multiple systems. So, all right. So for myself, DBQ Hams and Game Logic, this has been episode 252 of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. Thank you for joining us, whether you've joined us live, whether you're listening throughout the week. We are always glad to have you, and please feel free to come on back. Yes, sir.
I did have one other thing. I just want to get this in the live show because I was remiss. So we did have one person who came through the live stream, Donnell Brown, who was a viewer and follows me on Twitter, and mentioned I was told Sony was going to be the next blockbuster. So I don't think that's a credible take, but it's certainly an interesting speculation, Donnell. So thanks a lot for dropping that as you came through. We appreciate you as always.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, that's great. All right. So until next week, play the games you love those you play with, and be kind out there. Good night.